Welcome to Mamatoosa, Conversations with a Midwife. I'm your host, Atusa Benji. A quick note before today's episode. This show talks about birth, life, death, and all the complexities in between. My goal is always to share stories that leave you feeling empowered, but please know that some topics may be challenging or deeply moving. Also, while I'm an experienced midwife, I'm not your midwife, and the information on this podcast is not intended to be medical advice. Please consult your healthcare provider when considering what is best for you as an individual. Now, without further ado, I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Mamatoosa podcast. I am delighted to have Debra Pascali-Bonaro with us today. She is not only a cherished mentor and colleague and friend, but just like so many of my guests, I feel so grateful and honored that the majority of my guests, or actually all of my guests, are just people of so much grace and dignity and generosity and humility. Because if I were to tell you a little bit about Debra, when you call, she picks up the phone. When you email, she responds to the email. When you text, she always has time. And it's not because she's sitting on her couch eating bonbons. I don't think most of the time. She's usually traveling or teaching, taking care of family, or being in the birth world across many, many continents, but she always makes time for colleagues and for questions. And I find that just not only heartwarming, but just a testament to your humility, because it's very easy to get busy and just not be able to have time for anybody and so focused on our work. And that's really not who you are. So welcome, first of all, welcome.
Thank you so much, Atusa. And thank you. That was just so beautiful, right? Because I feel the same about you. I think when we work with the passion that we have and the dedication to really having positive, respectful, safe, equitable care for everyone, then that's who we are, right? We just show up, and that's what you're doing and I'm doing. And we're really there to bring that change to each person and to the collective system as well.
Thank you. I have a tremendous amount of love and respect for you. I know that you have a degree in education and you are also a Lamaze childbirth educator. And I know you through DONA because we're both DONA trainers. You obviously have been doing it a lot longer than I have, but you're an international certified birth and postpartum doula. And you are also an author. Congratulations on your very first published peer-reviewed journal article.
Thank you.
Super, super exciting. I know that this is not your first scholarly work, that you have worked with many other people on many different fronts about women's health and the anatomy of pleasure. But you were recently featured in Frontiers in Global Women's Health in May of 2025, which is just a couple of months ago. So that is brand new. But I know that you are also co-chair of the International Childbirth Initiative and chair of the International Mother-Baby Childbirth Initiative. And I know that you're also a member of the White Ribbon Alliance for Shaping Evidence-Based and Compassionate Birth Education. So you are busy. And not only that, you co-authored with midwife Elizabeth Davis, Orgasmic Birth, your guide to a safe, satisfying, and pleasurable birth experience in 2010. And also more recently, the ultimate guide to sex after baby. And the amazing documentary, Orgasmic Birth, The Best Kept Secret, which you directed and produced. And you're also host of Orgasmic Birth podcast. So you are a busy, busy lady and doing such amazing work. I saw you recently in Bali. Tell me a little bit about what you were doing in Bali, because I was just up the street from you doing birth work in Bali.
Yes. And it was such a pleasure to meet you there and see that both our, work and retreats were coming together. But I teach in Bali every year. It's been 15 years. It's incredible. I feel so blessed with a dear friend and an amazing midwife and colleague, Robin Lim. And so we have Eat, Pray, Doula retreats there each year, which has the DONA Doula workshop like you teach as well. And then we always do an advanced retreat. So midwives, doctors, doulas, nurses, PTs, anybody that has a practice in birth and caring for people during pregnancy, birth, and postpartum can come not only to refresh and recharge, but to expand our skills and expand our community, right? To do this work, it takes a village in every way.
It really does. And it was such an honor for me to meet Robin. I had met Robin before, but I was giggling because she was literally sitting by the pool. And I look over, I'm like, is that Robin Lim? Oh my God, that's Robin Lim. And then I look a little further, I'm like, well, there's Debra Pascali-Bonaro. Wait, that's Naomi Viniver. I was like, I'm in the Hall of Fame. Tell me a little bit about your work, because the first time I ever heard about orgasmic birth was from my friend who told me she had an orgasmic birth. And the concept, and I was much younger at the time. I was probably, it was like 20 years ago. And when I first heard it, I was like, yeah, eye roll, I'm sure you did. Like, what are the odds of that? How often is it even talked about? How embarrassing? All those like judgy, ignorant sort of things that I thought in my head. Not that I'm ever judgy or ignorant, but I had a blind spot, right? And it was only until many years later that I was able to, and which you clarified when you came to speak to my workshop in Bali one night, where the word orgasm doesn't only epitomize fulfillment or pleasure or completion sexually. So it was really the first time for me that someone so gracefully spoke about the word orgasm in a way other than just related to sex and intercourse. And it sort of blew my mind. So how did you get into this work?
That's a big question, Mamatoosa. So
we have about 3.5 hours, so keep going.
Right, I know. So I have to say, like, if you really, really go back, I have to believe that the seed for me of seeing birth as positive, pleasurable, powerful was really in the stories of my great-grandmother. And I was a very little girl, and she was an older woman, and she was typically pretty quiet, and she was also somewhat petite and somewhat round. So when in her late 80s she would get up to move, she kind of really got herself up slowly and kind of waddled. But when I would ask her about her birth stories, and I have to say I must have come into this world with the mission to work in birth, because I don't know how many little girls my passion was to hear birth stories. Like, don't tell me a bedtime story. Tell me your birth story. And she had 8 children at home because she came to the U.S. from Italy in the early 1900s. And so when she had like my grandmother and all her siblings in the 20s and 30s, birth just happened at home. So for her, birthing at home wasn't really like a conscious choice. It was just what you did. And she told her birth stories with such grace and power. And she talked about challenge. She talked about moving and walking and working in the earth and being in the community and having support of the women in the family and those around her. And then she would talk about, and she would get up and waddle over to the kitchen sink. And in her late 80s, she would reenact the birth of this kind of upright forward lean over the sink. And she talked about with 8 babies, some of the babies came before the midwife. So my grandmother, as the oldest daughter, would drop to her knees and catch the baby and hand it to her. And so I always saw her like reach down for this imaginary baby. If you can picture this, like late 80s, walking slow, but she would bring the imaginary baby up and light up the room with oxytocin and love and power and joy. And she would say to me, it's hard work, but when it's your time, you can do it. And it is the best day of your life. And that story and her stories, telling it again and again, and then thinking that my grandmother, who when I was a little girl, I thought she was somewhat old, right? At the time, she was younger than me. But that she could just drop on her knees and catch the baby, I was like, what's the big deal with birth? So it set me on this journey that when it was my time to give birth, I really started to question what I was learning. And I was giving birth in Montreal, Canada. There were no midwives in Canada at the time. It had been made illegal. And I really struggled to find a caregiver that would honor and respect my wishes, allow me to move and give birth upright like my great-grandmother. And I think that whole journey made me think, why don't other people know the stories of our great-grandmothers? Where did we lose that wisdom and that knowledge? And so that set me on a path to start being an educator, being a doula. And I would be at births and I would see challenge, but I would see joy. I would see intensity, but I would see ecstasy. And I started thinking, we talk about pain and fear all the time, but why weren't we talking about that we can hold it all and there are so many other emotions? So I have to give my subconscious mind credit, because I was literally asleep one night and I had the most vivid dream of making the documentary Orgasmic Birth. And I never thought about making a movie. I have no experience in film. My husband, when I woke him up at 2 a.m, I said, Jimmy, I have to make a film. He laughed and he said, go back to sleep and have another dream, because I'm not usually the person you give a camera to, right? But when I woke up in the morning, the dream was so vivid. And one thing I knew is that you don't have to know how to do it all. You have to find the people that do. And it was through collaboration and community that the team came together. But as we were getting ready to make the film and already started filming, I have to tell you, I wasn't sure what I was going to call it, because I was like, Orgasmic Birth, is the world ready for this? And you're going to laugh, but the original title that I thought would be safer was going to be An Ordinary Miracle, Global Models of Care. And if I had called it that film, it would probably be in a box and 3 people would have seen it. But I ended up at a pitch session, which, as I'm learning about film, I got invited to this meeting with the head of HBO and the head of Showtime and many networks there. And I had just finished teaching a doula workshop and I had to go. It's like a New York moment. I was like, I gotta go. And the doulas are going, where are you going? And I'm like, I have to go to this pitch session. I'm working on a documentary and I'm out on the street before Ubers, right? I'm trying to whistle and hail a cab. And one of the women says, can I come with you? And I said, I do have an extra ticket. And she said, well, I'm a film major. I'll come be your film doula. So I said, hop in the cab. And literally that spur of moment, she jumps in. We go in and the pitch session is all experienced filmmakers, and they're making serious topics about famine and war and all these things. And it comes to my turn and I stand up, and you have to stand in place and supposedly have 10 minutes to give your pitch. And I say, An Ordinary Miracle, Global Models of Care. And the head of HBO says, you can sit down now. I don't need to hear about it. With a title like that, we're not even interested and nobody's going to watch it. So my second title, to be safe, was Ecstatic Birth. So I yelled out before I sat down, Ecstatic Birth. And he's like, sit down. We don't need to hear that. And my film doula taps me and says, yell out Orgasmic Birth, because I had been teaching about orgasmic birth that day. And I was a little bit shy, but I thought, what do I have to lose? So I popped right back up and I yelled, Orgasmic Birth. The whole audience laughed and they said to me, wait, is that possible? And they gave me my 10 minutes and they said, if you make that film, people will listen. So I have to credit the name Orgasmic Birth coming out of, it was a term I was already using, but I was a little bit shy myself. Like you said, we've internalized shame and we've disconnected birth from part of our sexual life. We haven't talked about that the same organs that we often can have pleasure, although I want to honor for many people we're survivors of trauma and sexual abuse. And again, that's why our documentary has a survivor story, because embracing sexuality and pleasure gives us a deep opportunity to go deeper into healing in pregnancy, for caregivers to be aware of how to be providing that safe and respectful care to all people, whatever our past has been, as you know well. And it allows us to look at when we connect our whole life, our pleasure, our sensuality, our sexuality, our emotional and spiritual world, then birth has this orgasmic ability. And as you said, it doesn't mean orgasm. For each person, I always ask people to write your own definition, because no one should put on you what's orgasmic to you. And if you define it in your own way, you're more likely to achieve it in whatever birth asks of you, right? We never know if our baby needs something different than we desire so that they can have a safe birth, right? Sometimes we need to use technology, and we can still do that in a way that's full of love, power, recognition, respect, people feeling that they are truly the center of it. So we've been seeing lots and lots of people, when they write their own definition, when they're really educated, and either do healing work if it's needed, but tap into how is birth a connected part of their sexual life and their intimate life, and how can we bring more pleasure to ourselves in pregnancy, in birth, and in parenting. Then lots of people can enjoy saying that they had an orgasmic birth. And I will add that thing that there are many people that are having orgasms. Yeah. So I don't want to leave that out, because many people have told me, literally thousands over the years, that they had what we call a birthgasm, an orgasm at some point. And this doesn't mean it's at the moment of birth. Some people have rolling orgasms during labor, as they're pushing, as the baby emerges. And so we do need to talk about it, because thousands of people have come up to me at different times over these years and often thanked me for using the term orgasmic birth and including that orgasm, because many people said to me, kind of with their eyes down, not wanting to make eye contact, actually feeling shame that it happened to me. And when I would say what, they would say, I had the biggest, most expansive orgasm of my life, but I never told anyone. Many of them didn't tell their partners. They didn't tell their best friends, their family, and no one I know tapped their midwife or doctor on the shoulder and said, guess what just happened? Like they didn't tell people, because everyone talks about pain. And so they felt, how could they give voice? Even though they may have had a lot of pain earlier, they might have had a long, challenging labor, but this moment of ecstasy, one woman said to me that it was the most expansive feeling of being connected to the divine that she had ever felt. And so to imagine that people have this expansion, that they feel it in this exquisite way in their body, in their emotional well-being, in their spiritual well-being, and they can't talk about it because they feel shame to say this happened. So I believe we have to talk about it, however you define orgasmic birth, and to hold open that for anybody that does feel the waves of expansion that we might associate with orgasm, that this is the body's way. The baby's coming through the cervix, through the vagina, the clitoris, all 8 to 10,000 of those nerve endings are getting contact and sensation. So it makes sense that when people feel safe, when they're in an environment where they're being supported and respected and honored, that their body can actually give them pleasure, which is a great way of countering any of the challenge and the discomfort. So we now know birthgasm is real, and studies are showing it's a great pain reliever.
If you like Mamatoosa, check out In the Cut podcast, where professional writers go to break down their favorite episodes of TV. Season 2 is all about the Emmys. Join your host, Ray Benjamin, and her guests as they explore the storytelling structure behind Emmy award-winning shows like Sex and the City, The Bear, Atlanta, and more. If you've ever wondered what makes an excellent episode of TV stick with us long after it ends, then I know you'll enjoy In the Cut podcast. Check it out on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. Tell me a little bit about your study.
So I haven't done this study. I've been collecting stories, so that's more qualitative data, right? But there are definitely researchers and studies that have come out where people are really working with people about orgasm. I keep joking, and we're kind of talking about it. It would be interesting, but I don't know how we do a randomized trial on that to give one group you can't have an orgasm and the other group you have to. But yeah. I kind of feel this way too. And Elizabeth Davis and I say this in our book, Orgasmic Birth. We would never want birthgasm to be a performance standard. I always say to people, please don't put it on the birth plan, because you have enough to do without getting to orgasm. But I think to be aware that it's a possibility, then should it happen, hopefully you don't have any shame
around it. I love that. The first time I spoke to a midwife about the concept of an orgasmic birth, she presented it in a much more anatomical way. She said, well, if you think about it, when a person typically is unmedicated, the tremendous pressure of the baby's head coming down puts pressure on the rectum, and people have all of that like pressure bearing down, but then the rectum actually shares its neighbors with the vaginal wall, so that's what's getting stimulated. But it just didn't seem enough for me. I was like, that's not enough, because there's clitoral stimulation. There's where your head is. There's, do you trust what's happening? Do you trust who's in the room? Have you surrendered to the process? It just didn't make sense that it would be purely anatomical.
I agree with you. I think there's a lot of anatomy there, but if our mind, think about just having sex on any night, whether it's solo or with a partner. If your mind's not in it, it doesn't matter how much stimulation, it often isn't pleasurable, right? And our bodies really I always say to people, think about if you're in the middle of really getting pleasure flowing, and then you think of 3 things you didn't do today that still have to get done, right? The mind will just drop it all off. And that's true in birth, right? Strangers coming in and asking questions, not feeling safe, not having the privacy that you desire in order to go into that intimate space. So I do agree. There's a lot of emotions, and creating what I call birth ambiance, right? What is the environment, the right place that you would want to be intimate? You need to feel that you're in a similar kind of environment to that. And Dr. Sarah Buckley, who we both know and love, who has done just incredible writing and research around the hormones of birth, really talks about a lot of the hormones that flow in order to have a gentle birth are the same hormones that flow in intimacy and are responsible for female orgasm. So we have the emotions, we have the hormones, which are impacted by the emotions and how they're flowing. We have positions when people are laying more in bed and laying back, where the pressure is kind of flowing for them is different than when people are leaning forward. and leaning into kind of the pressure of the baby, leaning forward, as you know, is helping the baby rotate. But leaning forward is leaning into that clitoral complex, which has those 8 to 10,000 nerve endings. So like birth position matters because of gravity, but it also has a huge impact on pleasure as well. So as you said, I think there are many, many factors to consider if you're looking to really optimize your pleasure in birth.
How are we going
to get a visual?
I know. You're going to pull out your clitoris model.
Well, I have all different ones. So this is one that I really like, and it helps kind of see. It's about a life-size model of the clitoris. And when we think about it, right, so many people only think of that tip, that clitoral hood there, but don't really recognize that we have these beautiful legs and bulbs, and that the clitoris really wraps around the urethra, the vagina, and it is 8 to 10,000 nerve endings, right? So I love this, but I also have another one that a friend of mine literally made for me.
I love this one. We saw this one in Bali. It rocked my world.
So this one is so nice.
Get this.
It's kind of my pussy puppet there. And so it's really great because you put your hands inside and you can talk to the pussy. And I think that's good because we need to listen to our bodies. What do our bodies say? And particularly our yonis, our pussies, right? We have times when it feels right and we get juicy and wet and open. And we have times where we don't feel safe or it's not the right moment and they kind of close down and say not now. But when we look here, and if you can see, there's a little clitoral hood there. And so from the outside, we just see a little bit, like we don't think about what that is. But if we turn it around and we take this clitoris out, we can then see the legs and the bulbs there and how much space it is. And I know when you were with me at Mamatoosa, everybody had fun because then you put it back in. And when you put it back in and you have to kind of open here to place those legs and those bulbs all in, you start realizing how much area that's taking up. And how can it be that the biggest thing ever coming out of your body, your baby, doesn't come in contact with all these nerve endings? And if we've been so conditioned, if we think of like the placebo effect, right? We now call it in birth the nocebo effect. We're planting so many negative messages, so much about pain and fear, and people are putting you down physically and emotionally that your mind is so shut down that anything else is possible, then it's not. But when we can really bring that healing and open up and understand our anatomy and understand what's possible, we can lean into pleasure. And I'm going to bring you back. Here's a female pelvis here. Let me get my other clitoris that's life size. And if you think about leaning forward, the clitoris fits right here under that pubic arch. And when you lean forward as opposed to laying on your back, you're leaning into those 8 to 10,000 nerve endings. And so much more is possible than what we talked about. And we know that the clitoris is sole purpose is pleasure, right? It doesn't have other functions. So how could it be this anatomy of pleasure doesn't have an impact or a role in birth that we've really silenced? And I say we sterilized birth. We stripped away this element of sexuality, because when we admit that birth is a continuation on the sexual life of that birthing person, then we have to ask every person that enters the room, how are you going to support that? And I think that medicine created gowns and drapes and all kinds of things to mask birth as a medical event. And that way nobody has to deal with the sexuality. And as you said earlier, many, doctors don't have the time in their visit to talk about sexuality, to talk about what has it been for you? Is there healing? What do you need to feel safe? maybe there's more knowledge. Many people I talk with have only had sexual education in high school that kind of didn't really give them good education at all. And many family structures also have shame or really shrouded sexuality and never talked about it. So for many people, this hasn't been something that they've been educated well in life, and certainly not educated in birth. So we have a new opportunity to really embrace the clitoris.
We really do. It's interesting you say that, because I often teach middle school girls, because I would have pregnant women come to my childbirth classes. And when I started showing the anatomy, or when I talked about some of the things that happen in birth, I got words like gross and disgusting and ew, and I didn't know. And I was like, wow, like these are educated professional people who are doing amazing work. But when it comes to the work of the body, those are the words that are used. And I was like, all right, how can I contribute to changing this paradigm? So I started putting together a curriculum for middle school girls, and it's going very, very well. However, on one particular day, I got a question from one of the girls. We were talking about tampons, and one of the girls raised her hand. I think she was in 6th grade. And she said, how do I know that I'm putting my tampon in the right hole? So I was like, all right, fair enough. So I literally pulled out on my PowerPoint, I pulled out an anatomy of the female external genitalia. And Debra, it was not Grey's Anatomy. Okay. It was 6 arrows. Okay. It was labia majora, labia minora. And then from the top, clitoris, urethra, vagina, rectum. Done. And I said, okay, girls, let's take a look. So here's your clitoris. This is the point of pleasure. You're actually not going to be able to put a tampon in there because it's not going to go in. Then you have your urethra, which is for your pee-pee to come out. A tampon will be very uncomfortable if you try to stick it in there. It's very small, not designed in that way to stretch. Then we come down to the vagina, where your period blood comes out. This is where babies are vaginally born. This is where intercourse happens. And this is where the tampon goes in. And then you have your rectum, which is also really not designed for a tampon to go in. It's going to be uncomfortable if you try to do that. Fine. I got so much pushback from parents who said, why did you use the word clitoris, number one? And then why did you equate pleasure with clitoris? First, I was angry, and then I had to sort of come down and be like, okay, well, I can see this. I can see this. So when you talk about people walking away as adults, when you're talking about orgasmic birth, because look where it started, where even in your quote, it wasn't even sex ed. I almost call it like a girl power class, right? Where I'm talking about very specific anatomical landmarks. And even that is not allowed to be discussed. And so we have so much work to do. And you use the word shame. So much shame associated with our sexuality and birth and pleasure. And it's so broken. And so I'm hopeful that we're moving towards change, especially now that there's much more talk about, our bodies and empowerment around our bodies and how we choose to use sexuality and how that's connected to childbirth and intimacy and all of that. But when you talk about the number of barriers, it's from a very young age. Yeah. It's not something that just pops up in your 8th month of pregnancy. It's years and years and years, and intergenerationally, epigenetically, what we're being given. And every culture is a little bit different. We're Middle Eastern. You don't talk about that stuff at all. We always joke that as many Middle Eastern women, you're taught to keep your sexuality completely closed off until you get married. But on the night of your wedding, you're supposed to become a sexual animal. And it's like, how do you go from not being able to equate the word pleasure to your clitoris to all of a sudden on the first night of your wedding? That's actually where trauma begins for many. Yeah. Is no one told me it would be like this. No one told me it would feel like this. And so there's so many nuances to this.
Yes. And I want to just thank you that you're teaching young girls. And I'm so sorry to hear the reaction of parents, because it is true. Like, if we're not able to really honestly talk and name our body parts and really understand how they work, it's going to be harder for people to have that healthy relationship with their body, to find pleasure, and also to be able to have fully informed decision making about their bodies. That's equally important on when we say no, right? To understand what our bodies are capable of, and that we have the decision making on that. So thank you for your work. We have a long way to go, right?
We have a long way to go. We really do. And part of the work is also teaching people to make themselves familiar with their bodies before someone else is familiar with their body. Because so many times it's either your doctor who looks down there, or it's a sexual partner who looks down there. And that's if the person is not part of the horrible statistic of 3.5 out of 5 women have some sort of inappropriacy associated with their sexuality by the time they're, 18 years old. If they don't fall into that statistic, then typically the first person looking down there is either a doctor or a lover. To my point, how many times does the expert become someone outside of ourselves? And what I teach the girls to do is just take a mirror and look down there. It's yours. It is yours. Take a look at it. Let's move away from calling it disgusting and nasty and ew to, oh, that's actually pretty awesome.
Beautiful.
Look at that. I think I need to borrow my your clitoral model for my 6th graders and have the school like send a grenade into my house. It's fascinating that then that translates into later on whatever the doctor says.
And we need to normalize this. I think that as women, right, we don't see this part of our body. Men or anyone with a penis, they see it every day because they have to in order to urinate, right? But we don't get that. So I love that you're saying, yes, grab a mirror, take a look, really get comfortable with your body. And this is essential to give birth.
So if someone were to call you and say, hey, Debra, this sounds great. How do I have an orgasmic birth? What would you tell them?
I would tell them first to work with someone that's good at preparing you on that, right? We certainly offer classes both online and in retreats and other places and coaching. But there are many people today that we're working with. We have a good community called Orgasmic Birth Practitioners that are midwives, doulas, doctors, educators, therapists from around the world that are coming together in how they can integrate orgasmic birth into their practice. Because I do think for some people, it's just going to happen. Like, I think my great grandmother, if she could have known about orgasmic birth, would have said she had one. Not that she had an orgasm, but that she had great joy, she had power, she had choice. But I think today we almost have to unlearn all the negative things we've learned. We have to really look at what the history in our own family has been, because sometimes generations before us didn't have joyful births. They had birth trauma, and we're learning that the stories we've heard, maybe it's our own coming into the world, was challenging. There's a lot of healing to do to then be able to look forward and say, what do I want to embrace in my own journey? How do I want to welcome my child or children? And then there are just so many little tips and tricks that certainly optimize your ability to find more joy and pleasure in birth. But I definitely think for most people, it takes some preparation and some time, and not just, I'm always sad today when I hear people are just taking 4 hours in one day and trying to prepare for birth. I think that that's better than nothing, but birth is a day you will never forget, and it deserves to really give it conscious effort, as I know you do with your clients, to really go on a journey of where you're at and where you want to be, and create an individual plan of your path to get there.
And I think that's really part of the beauty of midwifery care also. Not that people can't achieve orgasmic birth or have support from physicians, but the physician Western model makes the system forces physicians to have such short visits that you barely get through your signs and symptoms and a couple of questions in your 7 or 10-minute visit. Never mind talking about, your sexuality or your process or how you got here is almost unheard of, versus it's much more likely that it would happen in an hour or an hour 15 or an hour and a half visit with your midwife, typically in your home, where a lot of this stuff sort of gets opened, gets unpacked, which is, yet another, I think, reason to seek out midwifery care, even if you're not going to have your baby at home necessarily with a midwife. But the care of that 9 months of preparation, I think is huge, in my opinion. I
totally agree. So
yeah, well, I know you do. And I know the work of Sarah Buckley, who wrote Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering, really rocked my world, because while we talk so much about oxytocin, I always talk about, when I teach doula trainings, I talk about oxytocin as like the diva who's on stage, who sort of, is very powerful as part of the symphony, but not the only instrument. Not the only part. There's so many other instruments that come in quietly. Sometimes there's percussion, sometimes there's drums or a harp or a trumpet, or by the time you get to the crescendo of birth, it's not only oxytocin that's pumping. It's a whole orchestra that's happening. And I love that you talk about your grandma. I'm looking at a picture of my grandma as we speak, because her picture sits next to me. Oh. And I love there's all this grandma and great grandma energy on the podcast today, because I got a call just before I came down to talk to you today. A woman called and she said, "Hey, I'm preparing for pregnancy. And I know I want to have a home birth. I wanted to talk to you as a midwife and sort of talk about, how I can prepare my body for pregnancy and for birth, and how does home birth midwifery work." And she said, the reason I'm calling you is because I loved the story on your website about your relationship with your grandmother. And I feel like we started this podcast with your relationship with your great grandmother, and my grandmother brought me tremendous awe to childbirth. She always talked about the miracle of birth, the awe that one human comes out of another human in such perfect order. And so my grandmother was very instrumental in my journey of becoming a midwife, and told me to become a midwife. It was one of the few things she said to me before she passed away very suddenly. And I was like, midwife? There's no such thing as midwives. Like, they don't even exist anymore. And lo and behold, I became a midwife. But I think there's a lot of power to what our mothers and our grandmothers, and in your case, to have a young great grandmother who could still share the story and reenact that joy that you picked up. And when I talk to Noah, my granddaughter, we talk a lot about birth. I'm reading her, my daughter calls it midwife propaganda. I'm reading her midwife propaganda all the time. Like, most of our bedtime stories are, my mommy's a midwife, my mommy's going to a birth, my mommy's having a baby, we're having a home birth, so she has now decided she's going to become a midwife assistant at the age of 5. And I said, well, why don't you become a midwife? She said, no, I'm going to start with being an assistant. And I was like, okay, great. I love it. But to that point, there's a lot of power to the way our mothers and grandmothers and the women around us talk about birth. And I think that that's changed over time. I know that you've been an educator for many decades. What are you seeing from the medical community when you're teaching? I know that you teach not only, birthing people and people expecting people, but you also teach birth professionals. Are you
Correct.
Seeing a change in the judgment or the model or the openness to this paradigm?
Definitely seeing a change. I think 10 years ago, I saw a lot more fear in everyone. Like, providers are in their own fear too, right? Fear because their model is, what if something goes wrong? Like, they focus on the 1%, not the 99%. And, in the US, litigation and just all different things. So what I'm seeing though is people used to kind of stand behind a model that we knew was dysfunctional, that was overusing valuable technology that's needed when we need it, but they weren't utilizing all the ways like midwifery does that supports the physiology, that supports people that want to move and use their body and have access to all kinds of different comfort measures. What I'm seeing now is people are finally more collectively acknowledging that the system's broken, that there is dysfunction there. And at least that opens up to what could we do? And so the discussions are getting deeper. There are more people that when I used to say orgasmic birth, almost like if we were in a room just talking casually, a lot of people just walked away. They were like,
oh, for sure.
I'm not listening to that. Now they're flocking in and they're like, what is that? And how do we have that? So I think we are changing times right now. I think we still have a long way to go. But I'm optimistic that more and more people are saying, okay, what we've been doing isn't working. And not only not working, it's putting people at risk, right? As we know, the inequities for Black, Brown, and Indigenous birthing people is unacceptable, right? And just for all people to be exposed to technology at levels that we know are not necessary for safety is, I believe, almost a human rights violation for many people. So I think that as more and more people are speaking up, both people preparing for birth and providers are starting to say, we have to listen in a broader way. We have to look at science, and orgasmic birth, I always say, is science-based, right? We have the data, we have the science, we have the knowledge. And it's not to say that we don't use technology when needed. It's finding that appropriate path, and we still can have, as you know, a beautiful, gentle cesarean that's filled with love and joy. And for some people, that's their definition of orgasmic birth, even when the baby needs a different path. So I think the times are changing. And I will just add, and you added it in my intro, that I co-chair the International Childbirth Initiative. And so we are an initiative of 12 steps to safe and respectful mother, baby, family, maternity care. And you know, we're in 35 different countries around the world, and many of them are very low-resourced regions of the world. And they're coming in and saying, what we're doing isn't really right. Like, we know there's more to do better. And watching these sites, their dedication to change, their willingness to kind of make change one step at a time and really look at how they can offer their best care is heartwarming every day. The stories I hear, what I see from places around the world just lifts me up all the time, and it reinforces that I know we're on that path to change.
You're doing such incredible work. Are you seeing more resistance to change here in the United States?
Sadly, the U.S. is one of the harder ones. You know, it's hard for me to understand fully why. I keep coming back to the U.S. birth is a business, so we have a different incentive than many other countries do. But, you know, when we work in low resource areas, we present the 12 steps and the process, and no one ever comes at us and says, well, we don't have enough money. They really go, well, how do I do it? The question is how. We want to do it. How do we do it? And money most of the time does not enter the conversation. When we bring it up in the U.S. with facilities, money's always on the table. How much will it cost? We don't have enough money. And I'm like, wait a second. You spend more than any other facility we work with. You have so many more resources than so many of our facilities, but somehow money becomes a barrier here that's not perceived in many other places. And I always I don't know if I should say this publicly, but I feel the U.S. has a lot of excuses, even though they're talking that they want the change and they know we need the change and that every birthing person deserves the change. We still, though, are stuck in this system that's not really changing quick enough for the knowledge that we have.
It's interesting because I work in an area where there are many corporate hospitals, and in many of these hospitals, their legal team is made of hundreds and hundreds of lawyers. I can't even imagine the money that is spent on litigation, whereas it could have been spent preemptively, giving people better care so that they feel heard and seen. And then we don't have to spend money on the other side trying to, CYA by creating protocols that then actually make more problems that then end up more in litigation. So we're in this vicious cycle of where's the money going to come from? But you keep buying buildings, you keep eating up local shops to build these huge medical centers with massive, salaries for administration and for boards and lawyers everywhere and protocols to cover your butt. But if you actually stop and think about what does a birthing person need? What do they actually need? Yes, they need medical care. They need an OR down the hall. Maybe they need a team of doctors and midwives and skilled nurses. But more than anything are we seeing and hearing people? And I think this model of the 12 steps, which I'm so passionate about bringing to especially one of our local hospitals, is so huge in making this change. The other thing with hospitals is that, one, it takes eons to make change. Eons. It's not like, oh, this is a great idea, let's implement it. It has to go to this person and that person and the other person, who is now not here, who's being replaced, but this person's on maternity leave. So when they come back, we'll figure it out. And then by the time you lose momentum, and every time there's a change in administration, it really depends on what their paradigm of birth is. If anything gets movement, and then the money part comes into it, because money is allocated in different ways, and it's typically not for prevention. They have a lot of money to fix the problem, but not to prevent the problem. So that's where I'm seeing my greatest frustration is try to prevent it instead of try to fix it. It's the microcosm of even disease in this country, which is we're great at trying to fix stuff. You have diabetes, let us give you insulin and teach you how to use the pump. But there's not enough education on how big is that portion and what is your kid buying at 7-Eleven and what is the hospital vending machine selling. It's mind-boggling. So it's all within the whole system is broken. And I think that the hardest part of this is to watch physicians who want to collaborate.
Yes.
But are so entrenched that they burn out. They're like, how can I pay my loan off, take care of my family, have work-life balance, stick within hospital protocols, make my client happy, and now there's some sort of doula initiative on the table? How?
No, I agree. And I do have to say this is why the 12 steps have one step that really is about caregivers, that they work in a respectful, supportive environment. So we recognize, like you're saying, our caregivers are working so hard. They went into it with full intention and full heart to provide the best care, but they're stuck in the broken model too, right? But back to, and I think this is an important part of the International Childbirth Initiative, is so often when it is dependent on a person, we call them a champion, whether it's the chief of obstetrics or the director of midwifery, or there are people that are stepping forward with let's make change. When that person moves, when they get replaced, the whole initiative dies. So the ICI needs a collaborative committee. It's back to it takes a village. So we want to see doctors, nurses, midwives, doulas, therapists, and at least one women's organization from the community, that you have this group that forms the ICI advisory committee, and they have to be dedicated to meeting at least once a quarter. It can just be an hour, But again, the chief of obstetrics shouldn't be the chair. We want to make sure that it's not top-down power, but it's equal power where every voice is heard, and that collaboratively they do their own assessments, they make their own plan of which step are they going to work on, and that way, if any one person transfers, moves, has an illness, whatever would happen, the committee is strong enough that the committee carries forward and new people rotate on. And I think we have to look at that in models of programs, is we can't make them reliant on just one division, one person.
Absolutely. I love that so much. I had the tremendous pleasure of having a sneak peek into your secret, most recent item that is going to be available for the public. I'm so excited about it and so excited to share it with the people I serve. Tell me all about it, Debra.
Well, thank you so much, Atusa, because it's a great secret. You know, we say that orgasmic birth is the best kept secret, but I think this next one is really the best kept secret, is that we have designed and developed with Dame, a great company, the first vibrator for pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, and we're calling it the PleasureVibe. And what we're really seeing is many, many people that want to get in touch with their body's pleasure and that in pregnancy enjoy the vibe. We know that especially the end of pregnancy, right? We have that increased circulation. Some people that haven't been achieving orgasm may find it easier to. Other people just love the ability to get to know their body and what their body likes as it's changing and getting ready for birth. And then we know in childbirth that when you're bringing pleasure to your body, you're really decreasing pain. And so we're seeing a lot of people using vibrators. And this is external only. So ours is just a little kind of finger vibrator. It fits on in the palm of your hand. It could be used on your shoulder, on your lower back, on your labia, on your clitoris. It has a lot of places it can go where you can decide just when you need good vibrations to really support you to open fully to birth. And again, it's not necessarily about the orgasm. You can just be getting pleasure, which will enhance your oxytocin, that hormone of love that will often help labor speed along. Some people are using it instead of induction as using pleasure and maybe orgasm to get labor going. And then we know we have a lot of comments from our physical therapists, our pelvic floor physical therapists, who say if there is scar tissue, some gentle vibration at the right point, once there's already healing, not early on, but right, working with a PT and your midwife, that there comes a time where some vibration on scar tissue can really help. And for those that are breastfeeding and lactation, sometimes we get plugged ducts. I remember them from years ago. And again, a little bit of vibration where the duct might be a little bit stuck can be helpful. So we're seeing the PleasureVibe having pleasure all through that perinatal journey. And I hope going forward, because I think when women really know what brings them pleasure, when they take that into their own hands, you're able to communicate that well with partners. You're able to learn your body through this changing time of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum and beyond. And we're hearing from a lot of people that the best sex of their life happened because of this journey, that instead of now becoming a parent, things weren't as great or there were more problems. They've learned more about their body in the process, learned to communicate it well to the partners, and they're enjoying great sex, good communication. And I think that's the best model going forward for our families.
I'm so excited about this. And I had a chance to actually, we got a little sample when we were in Bali, and we took a little peek at it. It's a great product. And can you tell me a little bit about how many vibrators came to your door before y'all designed the one that you
Yes.
so
You like that story? So this has been so much fun.
That story so
wherever
much.
I teach in the world, and people always say to me, like, if I have a day off, what do you want to do? I was saying for the longest time, take me to a sex shop. I do pleasure research. And then I would like look up companies that make vibrators. And, you know, a lot of these vibrators and the companies up to fairly recently were male owned, male dominated. They were making what the male perception is of what women wanted. So I learned a lot in my pleasure research. And so for a while there, so many companies were sending me free vibrators that my husband one day said, what does our mailman think? Like, these are just constantly coming, you know? And I was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, right? So
He never looked at you quite the same when you walked down the street.
He always smiled at me. So I never kind of thought about like what he was thinking was happening in this house, because there were a lot of products coming by. But all that to say, I really did a lot of research, because I really thought what people need, what women need is really women designed, women focused, and needs to be something that's really practical and waterproof. So for those that want to have the ability to labor and or birth in water, whether that's a shower or a tub, that they still can get good vibrations too.
I love that it's designed for lactation and for postpartum and for birth and for labor. And then you can use it whenever you want afterwards. It's not like it's going to expire. No. I love the work that you do. I love you. I am so honored to be on this journey with you at this time. I'm looking forward to working more with you. Tell me where my listeners can find you and some of your work.
Yes. Well, the easiest place, and I don't think anybody will forget this, orgasmicbirth.com. Come over to our website. You'll see where you can click right on the homepage to the PleasureVibe if you'd like to get one, or all our programs, classes, and offering, including our film. And you can download the documentary, Orgasmic Birth, now in 8 languages. So if you haven't seen it, or maybe haven't seen it in a while, take a look and listen, because it's pretty life-changing for many people. You can link to our podcast there. And if you're on social, jump over, like us, follow us, comment on Instagram. We're Orgasmic Birth, the same on TikTok and Facebook. So most platforms you can find us as Orgasmic Birth. So I want to thank you so much, Atoosa. I love you. I love the work that you're doing. And I thank you so much for making this opportunity today for us to connect and to share our passion for pleasure with all who are listening.
Thank you, my friends. The honor and the privilege is truly mine. And I hope I see you soon in person for a big hug.
Me too.
Mamatoosa is hosted by me, Atoosa Benji, and produced and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson. Our theme music is composed by Mehri Lalazarian. If you'd like to support the show, please follow and review us on Spotify and Apple, or subscribe and like us on YouTube. This show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be medical advice. Always consult with your healthcare provider when making medical decisions. See you next Tuesday.